Cory, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a while. I know it's been more than a few months since we did the last session. Really looking forward to this one. And thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, Misha, thanks for having me. It's great to see you again. Obviously, lots happened in the world since the last time we talked, and looking forward to touching on some of it.
Absolutely. Well, they say sometimes there are decades when nothing happens, and sometimes there are weeks and decades happen. So it seems like we're in this compressed timeline when every time you open news and there's something new going on. So it's certainly fun times to be alive, to be around. Well, the topic of this conversation is really, I've been in chats with CISOs in our community, and Mythos is definitely top of mind for a lot of people, specifically because it appears to be capable of uncovering vulnerabilities, specifically 0-day, at a pace and a scope that was never seen before. So I know you're in the middle of a lot of those conversations, so just curious to hear your take on what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it feels like we're headed in an inflection point, right, in the industry. To have a model that can take, find vulnerabilities on a scale that we haven't seen before, right? The examples that Firefox, right, has come out where, previous models they've run against it have found just a few vulnerabilities. They've run, Mythos against it, and now it's finding hundreds, right? The exact same code base, right? That's something we haven't seen before. It feels like we're headed to a place where finding vulnerabilities isn't going to be the hard part anymore. It's how fast can we remediate or mitigate what's being found.
Interesting. And are we going to the world when patching within an hour is feasible, or is it still a pipe dream? Or is it more about prioritizing vulnerabilities first and patching second and kind of staggering them? Because it obviously, as you mentioned, finding is half of the problem, fixing is the other half. So do you think it's AI to the rescue in the patching on the patching side of things and remediation, or is it prioritized first or patch first? Like what's your sense? What path will people be taking?
Yeah, I still think it's prioritized first. I don't think Mythos and the advanced AI models change that. Things that are internet facing, things that are hosting crown jewels, right? They're always going to have to get prioritized before something that's sitting behind a jump host with 30 other layers of controls in front of it. So prioritization, I don't think that changes. What I do think will change is the speed in which each of those categories of prioritization are going to require patching or mitigation. Whether we get to an hour, I don't know. I think we're still a ways away from that. The reality is most organizations aren't going to be ready for patch in an hour. But I do think we've got to move quickly into the area of how can automation and AI help us testing patches with continuous penetration testing of environments, deploying patches, right? I think that's where we have to head. The idea that we can patch, once a month, once a quarter, I don't think those days are long for us without bad things happening. But I also don't think we're days or weeks or even a month or two away from patching in an hour. I think we're going to have to, as an organization, going to have to figure out how do we surge, prioritize patching in the short term, and at the same time, in parallel, move to some of that speed and automation, which also includes things like change management processes, SLAs and things like that are all going to have to get relooked at.
I see. Interesting. I'm not sure if you saw this, but so actually, it's a little bit of a step back. I think it's clear that Anthropic, they're being conscientious enough about the strength of the model, and that's why they have not released it yet to general public. My understanding is there is a very short list of organizations that have access to it. U.S. government, I think Microsoft, maybe Amazon, some of the larger organizations. I also heard that there was a handful of people. There was something on Reddit. I'm not sure if you saw this. I think it was one of the contractors of Anthropic who was very familiar with internal scaffolding, and they knew where Anthropic was keeping those models. And that person, and by association, a handful of other people that had kind of early preview and had access to that model. Again, I don't know enough. I only saw the news. I don't know if that access was used for nefarious purposes, but it kind of begs the question if another country less than friendly, let's say China, for example, develops a model with similar capabilities without the guardrails. So it's only just probably a matter of time before a very short model is released. And there's also a future out there where such model can be in the hands of nefarious actors before it can be used as a tool against nefarious actors. Again, go into 10,000 foot view. What's your sense in terms of where the world is going and what Mythos keeps CISOs at night? But taking this bigger view, taking this bigger view into consideration, what can corporate CISOs be doing right now to prepare for this world? It can be Mythos 2.0. It could be another model without those guardrails and first deployed by organizations or actors that are, again, less than friendly.
Yeah, I think the first thing about Mythos that caught my attention was the fact that it wasn't released publicly and it was limited to a small group of companies to be able to look at. Right, that sort of tells you at least what Anthropic thinks about its capability and its potential danger to the broader IT industry around the globe. And that would more than anything caught my attention out of the gate. But I mean, Mythos is only the beginning. To your point, there's already OpenAI's already released ChatGPT Cyber 5.4. There's already talk about DeepSeek coming out with a model. There's another organization in China, 360 Digital, who claims to already have released something. I think we have to plan for the idea that these models are going to get out, right? They're going to get out to actors that they shouldn't, we don't want them to have. I'm very aware of the reference you made on the folks, the contractors with Anthropic. All the information I have says that's very true. Fortunately, based on at least what's been reported, those folks were not using it for nefarious activity, but it just goes to show that at some point these models are going to get out. And we as an industry have to plan for that, right? I know for me, I'm thinking about, what does this do to the risk algorithms we have and the risk decisions we've made in the past where, speed wasn't at the level I think we're going to see it. And do we need to revisit some of those things? I think it reinforces foundational cybersecurity, right? The idea that you have defense in depth, the idea that you have zero trust, the idea that folks use multi-factor authentication and network segmentation. I think those things become even more and more important in a advanced AI and a model world that we have to function in, because they can help limit the blast radius. I think the other thing in the short term we all as an industry need to prepare for is there's the possibility that we may all have to deal with more than one major incident at a time. And I don't know that a lot of organizations plan for that, because historically that hasn't been the case. But if the models, get into the hands of the threat actors, or they've got models they're building to get more advanced before the defenders get them, we could have that. The other last thought that comes to mind with these advanced AI models is sophisticated nation state actors sit on 0 days until they decide to want to use them. If they believe that models like Mythos are going to expose those and they're going to get patched, are we going to see some of those nation state actors burn those 0 days before the patches come out in the next few months? That's another thing that I'm definitely paying attention to.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that. That actually makes a lot of sense, because it's probably something that was acquired for a substantial amount of money, and if there's a shelf life, and the shelf life has gotten a lot shorter with these new models, it's not in their interest to sit on those 0 days, but deploy them, which will probably precipitate a rise in attacks. And it's a scary world. Scary world. Cory, we touched on one aspect of AI, but it's really, at the end of the day, and again, it's kind of coming from conversations that we usually have in those mastermind events with CISOs. That's really, well, we talked about just one aspect, because from the CISO perspective, AI-enabled cybersecurity tools are coming online at a fairly rapid clip on how to use AI for SOC automation, how to use email security, securing AI agents. It seems every other week another company is coming out of stealth. So effectively using AI tools, emerging AI tools to enable defenders to do a better job. That's part one. Part two, businesses continue to deploy AI tools at a very rapid clip, and the pace is not abating. And it's clear just from the inordinate amount of money that goes into Anthropic and OpenAI and some of the frontier labs, and clearly there is no shortage of demand for tokens from the corporate side, and I think it's just early innings. It appears, and that comes from my understanding from respective boards or investors of those organizations who either see AI as an existential risk that needs to be addressed, or they see it as an opportunity, and they're under pressure to deploy solutions before their competitors do, because they feel if they're behind the ball, they'll lose out in the marketplace. So there was this rapid adoption by business in ways that not always secure, and that goes from longer conversation, but it goes from vibe coding and all the various tools that people who do not understand the basics of computer science and maybe cybersecurity, they just natural language. And with natural language, you can put together an app and push in production, and all the consequences are downstream for the cybersecurity team to sort it out. So that's a big thing of what CISOs are dealing with. And third, which is what we discussed, AI tools being used by nefarious actors in ways that we haven't seen before. So it's all these three vectors that are changing at a very rapid clip, which makes the job of a CISO very interesting. So we touched on one. What's your take on the other two on addressing needs of the business and in ways of them deploying AI tools, and how to keep that deployment secure, how to put guardrails, making sure that in that adoption, the business is not exposing itself to risk they don't even see or don't anticipate. And the second part of this, what do you see? You really sit in the intersection of a lot of trends and conversations from the AI tools for the defenders. Where do you see the world is going?
Yeah, I'll start with the AI for defenders, right? Because the reality is we've used AI for years, just what I think we would call today machine AI, right? And machine learning, right? You think about going back to even 5, 8, 10-year-old Sims, right, had machine learning and more recently machine AI built into them around correlation. Same thing with email security tools and network security tools. So it's been there. I think we've used it as an industry. What's changed is obviously generative AI, and then obviously more recently agentic AI. And I do think that the generative AI tooling for us, the way I look at it is, how can I use generative AI to increase the productivity of my team? And then frankly, how do I use it to allow them to focus on higher value tasks, right? Their work in, say, summarizing an incident case, while necessary and important, isn't the best use of their time. If I can have generative AI summarize that case so that they can spend more time threat hunting, right? Those are trade-offs I want to make, and how we're looking at using generative AI, and we're using it today. When I look at agentic, it's more about speed, right? I've begun, especially over the last few weeks, talking with my team where speed was always a goal. I think we're headed to a world where speed is going to be a foundational requirement. It's got to be safe, right? We just can't do it. You can't take a Ferrari on the Fifth Avenue in New York and expect to open it up and run, right? You got to take it to a track where it's controlled, right? We've got to use speed the right way. But I think we're headed to a place where we have to do that. That we're going to need to lean on our partners in the technology industry, to help build some of that into their tools we can take advantage of. And then we're going to need to use some of the models and probably build our own agents, right? I know at Kyndryl we're doing it with the Kyndryl Agentic Framework, And it sort of dovetails into the question you asked about how do we secure it and the business risk. One of the ways we're looking at it is what we call policy as code, right? How can I use the business policies and the workflows I have as a company, whether it's my IT policies and cybersecurity policies, whether it is the individual processes that are documented, and I teach the models those so it gives it the guardrails so that when we deploy agents for business use, we can use those guardrails to protect. But in my mind, and it's funny, I had this conversation with our board back at the end of January. How we defend AI isn't remarkably different than how we defend any other piece of technology, right? It's advanced, it's a new piece of technology, but you still need things like governance and policy. You still need things like for code, right? Secure software development. Does it matter if a human's writing it or if an agent's writing code? You still have to have secure software development. You still have to protect the code bases. You still have to way to test the agents to make sure that they're doing what you expect them to do. You have to have observability and auditability, just like you would with any other technology. How can I make sure that I understand the decisions it's making? How do I make sure that I'm getting the right logs off of it to the SOC to make sure that things are going the way they need to? So a lot of the foundational things we look at in AI, they're not remarkably different. Now the risk, right? AI, in my view, doesn't generate new risk. It just amplifies existing risk. If you've got tech debt, if you've got end of life, end of service, if you've got weak identity and access management, AI will expose it faster, right? It'll make it a bigger deal, but it's not as though it generated new risk. It's just amplified the risk we already have. So we can utilize similar approaches, but speed, I think, is where the game changer, like that's really what AI is doing, that we have to get faster at doing all these things.
Interesting. No, it certainly makes a lot of sense. If I run a hot dog stand and do everything with pen and paper, then I'm probably fairly safe, even though I'll probably bank with an institution that uses technology, so I'm still exposed. There's an edge where we'll still be exposed. You have a very interesting vantage point that you see environments of a lot of different clients across different industries. I would imagine some probably fairly large, some of them probably regulated. And if we pick on some of those vectors, you probably see successful deployments, successful leveraging of AI tools, and some of the fault lines. And for the benefit of our listeners, I was, again, without naming names, I was wondering if you could share some of the best practices and also some of the ways we can think things go sideways. And we probably can start where the first point of the conversation with whether it's Mythos or other tools with remediation and 0 days and vulnerability management. Again, if we're looking at it holistically, if you were to mention 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways where companies succeed in proactively and effectively managing that space, and what are the fault lines? What are some of the pitfalls that, when overlooked, can lead companies astray? What would you share as a best practice?
Yeah, again, I think in some respects it comes down to fundamentals. Those that have been successful, right? They understand, they deeply understand their environment, or they're working with a provider who deeply understands their environment that are helping them with that deployment. They understand their inventory. They know what they have. They don't have a ton of tech debt. They've got more modern architecture, right? Those deployments mixed with that governance I talked about a few minutes ago, right? Using those policies that you've got in place, expanding them to AI, understanding the risk profile of your organization, right? What's your risk tolerance as a company? To your point, the guy or gal running the hot dog stand with pen and paper has a very different risk tolerance from a cybersecurity perspective than a major bank or other critical infrastructure provider, right? Understanding your risk tolerance, right? What is most important? Those companies that do that are very successful. The pitfalls become when you try to do AI without those strategies, without those foundations and plans, without understanding the goals you're trying to reach, right? There are, large amounts of information that from Gartner and others out there today that talk about what percentage of AI investments actually don't pan out. And the reason it is high, right? The reason is, I think, because they don't understand what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to do AI because the hype says everybody has to do AI. To your point earlier, right? There's a lot of fear of missing out, right? From if I don't get it, my competitor will get it. Have the right foundational controls in place. Have a good understanding of your environment. Work closely to ensure the governance that you have. My experience with our customers is those organizations that do that are far more successful.
Interesting. And if we kind of use that frame to the other two sides of the puzzle, two vectors that we mentioned, and it's probably some of the translates because obviously if you basics are not in order, then a shiny penny will not help you. But it's really the basic housekeeping. That's where you need to start, and that will get you I don't know 80% there. And but if that is missing, then fancy tools will not solve missing basic cybersecurity policies. But is there anything specific in not just kind of vulnerability management, but broadly in putting guard, again, probably slightly different vector, helping businesses adopt AI tools with guardrails on? Probably some of the same suggestions that you mentioned with basics, but is there anything additional some color that you can put on in terms of where companies are successful and where they some missteps they need to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other side of the success is picking the right use cases, right, that are really going to drive value for that company, and then working whether you need to upskill within your own organization, right? Because the skill here is very important. The skill that you need to be able to develop infrastructure to run agentic AI agents is very different, right? You've got to upskill to do that. So whether you upskill that yourself or whether you work with somebody a services firm that can help you come do that, having that skill and that knowledge of your environment is going to be really important. I use an analogy, and it comes from my days in the U.S. defense space, right? You talked about the foundations and the advanced tools, and that's, I can have the most sophisticated submarine in the world. It can be the quietest with the best weaponry. Nobody can ever find it. But if I forget to close the hatches when I submerge it, it's still going to sink, right? And I come back to having the right AI security governance in place, right? At Kyndryl, we call it the AI digital trust, right? Having that in place and the right guardrails in place is, to me, the most important thing, because then it's just implementation of tech. If you got the right governance and the right skills to do the work, it's just tech implementation that you need to do.
Certainly. Switching gears a little bit, I know quite a lot of topics on the docket, but I'm curious. I'm looking at the world of cybersecurity startups, and obviously some of it is hype, some of it is real, some of it is fashion. What was fashionable before is probably not so much right now. I think I was at RSA a month ago, and every single company, every single vendor either had AI in the name or in the byline or in the materials. So it's certainly, and before that, at reInvent AWS by AWS, it was the same thing, even though the organizations were more technology focused, not necessarily cybersecurity, but still AI was kind of on everyone's mind. And for a practitioner, for a CISO, it's often difficult to make a distinction and difficult to discern. Do we go with an established company that's proven, that's adopting AI tools? Do we take a chance on the startup that is, as they call, AI native with a smaller team with substantial funding, but we don't know if they're going to be around 3 years from now? So there's always this dilemma. How do you think, putting a practitioner hat for a second, how do you think about some of those choices as some of the tools you definitely need help, whether it's consultants or products that you need to bring on board. Again, to continue this conversation, this idea of the single pane of glass, which is probably a sidebar conversation for this. The hope that instead of managing 60 relationships with 60 different vendors, we really want to have a handful and have like a single pane of glass that will address most of our challenges with one client, not with 10 that need to interoperate, and in doing so opens up edges for an attack. It's a loaded question, but as a practitioner, what would be your recommendation of how people should think when they're reviewing vendors, reviewing proposals, to make sure that they cut through the AI noise and really understand the capability of a solution, whether it's an established company or a newly formed up and coming startup? What's some of the rules of thumb or some of the heuristics that you can offer?
Yeah, it's hard, right? To your point, there's so much noise, so many startups. It feels like every day in the AI space and cybersecurity. We've got, and it's worked well for us, right? We've got a very structured process how we look at this, where we will do is we look at either new technology or we look at existing technology and where has the industry gone over the last period of time. As we look at renewals, is we will do trade studies. We will engage with a relatively small number of companies and look at what they're doing, and we will narrow that down into anywhere from 2 to 4 usually. And it's not driven by are they big or are they small. It's driven by how do they fit our requirements for what we're looking to do. And we will do active hands-on proof of value and proof of concept, right? We will deploy them in our environment, put that, after we go through the right, security gates and reviews and all those things, but we will put them in our environment and we will utilize them in real time for some period of time. That's how we get through understanding, is it really just slideware or is it really actually, a proven capability? And for us, frankly, it's about scale, right? And again, it gets back to understanding yourself as a company and your risk tolerance. A small company that doesn't have the scale of a large company doesn't have to worry about a particular piece of technology, scaling to tens of thousands of employees or thousands of customers. So we have to test for scale, and that sometimes, frankly, eliminates some folks from our trade studies because their technology is exceptionally good, but it's not yet at a point where it can scale, right? So my best advice, if you can do it, is actually bring these things into your environment and use them, right? See what they do with what you're trying to do in terms of closing gaps, right? We did this, a year and a half ago as we relooked at email defense. We've done it in the last 6 months as we're looking at AI security tools that can help with things around prompt injection and all that. And the last thing a piece of advice I would give is, if you get something from a startup, you should expect it's going to get bought, right? So you got to plan for the inevitable buy, right? Whether it's CrowdStrike or Palo Alto or Cisco or whoever, one of the big boys, they are buying up these small startups even before, in some cases, I think their value proposition has shown, right? So you have to plan for, if they get bought by so-and-so, what does that do, to my decision-making down the line?
Absolutely. No, and certainly potentially create some downstream questions, because I know that, well, Wiz was acquired by Google, and some of the clients of Wiz are Microsoft shops, and that creates a little bit of a question mark. So do they need to now become Google Cloud Shop, or can they stay with Microsoft, and with some competitive questions? It's certainly having this forward thinking makes a lot of sense. What up for 2026? If we can talk about Kyndryl's plans, like what's on dock for you, for the organization, for the company, whatever you can share.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right? We've talked about Mythos and the advanced AI models, right? That is front and center.
Hmm.
I am meeting with a number of my peers from our customers to talk about what it's doing. What are we doing about it? How can we help them? Right. So I think that's not going to go away in calendar 26, right? The advanced AI models are going to be a big part of it. How we secure the AI that we're building, right? Started in well into 25. It will continue into 26 for us, right? It is about those guardrails I talked about, getting the right governance and technology in place to do that, the right observability and auditability. And the other one, big one for us, is we're taking sort of a step back and taking a broader, holistic look at data security, right? When you look at what the advanced AI models can do, you look at what AI can do from a data security perspective. You look at what's happening regulatory wise across the globe with data sovereignty. We're having to plan for that, right? That's I won't say it's a recent change, but it's a growing change, right? There are more and more customers, more and more countries that are talking about, hey, I don't want my data to leave my walls or this region or whatever. And so, how do you do all this at speed if you can't aggregate the data in a way that allows you to turn AI across all of it very quickly, right? So that it is this broader data security and data sovereignty component that we're really paying attention to, and how are we going to plan for?
I certainly hope there will be federal legislation, and it's not going to be given to states. That's going to my
I would
vote.
agree. I would
My
agree.
vote, because it will be disastrous to navigate this environment. But that's awesome. Well, Cory, I know we're coming up on time. I would love to continue the conversation. As you probably know, we're hosting in-person events, so maybe we can chat about figuring out ways to have this conversation in person as part of this mastermind events that we're hosting around major conferences. Gartner's coming up, Black Hat. So it's probably a sidebar conversation. But thanks again for sharing your perspective, Cory. It's always a pleasure. Do you have any questions or wishes or recommendations for the audience before we wrap up?
Wishes. I wish everyone, right, with what's going on, right, I wish all of the cybersecurity professionals, IT professionals out there, the best as we go through this, what I think is going to be an inflection point in IT. I liken it a bit to, what cloud did 15, 20 years ago, right? I think we're at a bit of an inflection point. And my wish for everybody is the best. And my ask, right, is let's collaborate, right? Misha, I'd love to participate in person in some of these events and talk with my peers, right? None of us are going to be perfect on our own. We will be better as a community in attacking this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, yes, cloud is definitely a major inflection point, but it feels that the timeline is compressed. So
Yeah.
it's not just the change, the velocity, the slope is of change is certainly, it feels it's very different.